Hello, good evening and welcome to Biz First Review 360, your weekly roundup of the top business news and developments impacting the Sri Lankan economy. It's been a very interesting week here in Sri Lanka. We've seen the president come out and say that the goal of the new constitution is to strengthen parliamentary democracy in the island. Meanwhile, the debate is still raging on whether elections will be held, elections to local government and provincial councils. The minister in charge of local government and provincial councils, Faisal Mustafa, has given an assurance. He gave an assurance on Face the Nation on Monday. He repeated that assurance on Face the Nation on Monday when he said local government elections will happen in January, followed by provincial council elections in March. But there's a long road to those elections concerning delimitations and working with the Elections Commission to figure out when and where this can happen. So it's a long road. It's not going to be easy to get there. Will that happen? Meanwhile, we saw explosive revelations coming out of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into bond issuances when several heads of state banks informed the Commission that they had been instructed by former Finance Minister Ravi Karunanika to bid low on the bond auctions of February 2015 and then again in March 2016. Where does this all leave us? Let's take a look at the top stories this week.
Deputy Minister of National Policy and Economic Affairs Harsha De Silva told the Logistics Forum that the upcoming budget will focus on incentives for research and development. Successive budgets have not been allocating much for research and development, and Sri Lanka scores low in R&D when compared with regional countries.
Researchers, we were 111 researchers per million people. Singapore is 6,558 per million people. Right? Tilak is sitting right in front of me. These are guys who have been talking about innovation, about productization, and I feel that we have understood finally what this means, and in the budget you will see some very generous incentives to shift people away from, not away rather, but shift more people towards knowledge-based industries to innovate and sort of invest in productization.
He made these remarks while addressing the 2017 International Conference on the Chartered Institute of Logistics.
If you look at the total protection rates have in fact doubled in certain HS codes in this country between 2004 and 2014. Doubled. On certain agricultural HS codes, it has even gone more. On industry, it has doubled, and in others, it has gone up. So, it makes it difficult to trade. It becomes difficult for logistics and transport industry to engage because there are blocks, there are barriers, and they need to be cleared. So, we have taken a decision. And that decision is to remove para-tariffs. And we have taken a decision to remove cessors on exports. We have taken a decision to eliminate the obstructions that exporters and importers have in making Sri Lanka that hub that we want to make here in the Indian Ocean.
A Reuters report said Sri Lanka has blocked a proposal by Chinese firms bidding to build the island's biggest oil refinery to sell fuel locally. According to Reuters, there is a fear that the Chinese proposal can pose a threat to domestic firms such as state-run Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and the Lanka IOC, a subsidiary of Indian Oil Corporation. The veto is the latest in a tussle over Chinese investments in Hambantota, a southern town near an important shipping route where China controls the seaport and plans an industrial zone for Chinese firms and a $3 billion refinery with annual output of around 5 million tons. It is reported that the government has asked the Chinese firm to go for a partnership with the existing players if they want to sell their products in the local market. 10 more state-owned business enterprises are earmarked to sign statements of corporate intent next year aimed at better financial discipline, transparency and accountability. The Urban Development Authority, Ceylon Transport Board, Lanka Sathosa, Milco, National Livestock Development Board, State Pharmaceutical Corporation, State Timber Corporation, Lanka Putra Bank, Central Engineering Consultancy and the State Plantation Corporation are among the new enterprises to sign up for reforms.
In other stories this week, the strategic insights compiled by the Economic Intelligence Unit of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce make for some very interesting reading. Certain concerns regarding tourism numbers and the actual growth in the tourism sector caught my eye. Along with that, here's some other stories that made headlines this week.
The government constantly says that we have to hit 5 million tourist arrivals by 2020, and right now we are hitting around 2 million, 2.5, so on and so on.
That's right.
Somewhere along those lines.
That's right.
So can we hit 5 million, or is this just an exaggerated number?
Well, it's difficult to say at this point, Shaheen, because the scope of this report really doesn't cover if we can achieve that. But going by the numbers itself so far, we've noticed that the growth has been sluggish. It's been tapering down. However, what we can say is the government shouldn't solely depend on tourist arrivals to gauge the growth of the industry. Rather, they should also look at earnings and in terms of per day spend per tourist and their length of stay, where more mature markets like Thailand have aspired to do.
You spoke about accommodation and one of the reasons for the decline in tourist arrivals in Sri Lanka and for tourists to spend here. While that is also a somewhat reasonable way to increase revenue in Sri Lanka, to increase accommodation fees, however, some opine that these high accommodation fees do not have a return in terms of services, and some say that the services and the attractions we have in Sri Lanka are quite monotonous.
Absolutely, and that is interesting. So the industry players that I interviewed also commented on this, stating that accommodation, which accounts for about 60% of a tourist's budget, has been considerably increasing over the past few years. The high cost of construction coupled with refurbishments, as well as the high cost of skilled labor, have been some of the underlying factors driving the growth in the cost of accommodation. However, in terms of the cost of entrance fees to attractions, 91% of our respondents stated that they do not offer value for money, because some of the entrance fees have been some of the costliest in the region, with Sigiriya charging $35 for an entrance ticket, the Cultural Triangle collectively about $50. So this has been a significant concern given the fact that they don't have proper facilities at these sites for tourists. So also looking at the trend of attracting experiential tourists who are increasingly interested in experiencing the culture and everything the country has to offer in terms of locality as well. This is a significant concern given that these costs are increasing and they don't find value.
Speaking of numbers, is the government, obviously the government has set targets for 2020, 2025, so on and so forth. Is the government doing enough, or are these programs being implemented accordingly to reach these targets?
Well, it's an interesting point, Shaheen, though we haven't really understood the impact of these particular strategies and roadmaps they've set out, simply because they haven't been brought into effect. And it's been 2 months since some of these have been conceptualized and brought into sort of, or rather put into a particular strategy, as so to say. But its impact and its effects can only be observed once they have been implemented. However, interestingly noted on growth, whilst authorities celebrate achievements such as 1.5 million growth in arrivals or 2 million growth in arrivals, it's interesting to note that the growth in tourist arrivals has, since 2010, following the post-war bump, has been tapering down.
Welcome back to Biz First Review 360. Startups are all the rage in Sri Lanka right now. Even the big conglomerates have set up their own divisions to identify the next big idea. What are the challenges that these fledgling organizations face? Does Sri Lanka have an environment that's conducive for startup businesses. To talk about this and more, I'm joined by the two of the co-founders of ODOC, an online medical consultation platform, Heshan Fernando and Inshad Nizer. Just last month, ODOC received a round of $1 million US in seed funding, first round funding, the highest ever for a Sri Lankan startup. How did you guys achieve this feat, Heshan?
Okay, so I think that round of investment was probably 9 years in the making. Honestly speaking, the only reason we got it was since Ajit Gunawardena, the deputy chairman of John Keel's, came in as a lead investor. And he was Inshad and my mentor from our previous work at John Keel's for the last 9 years. After we got him on board, it was quite easy to get the other two investors. And yeah, there were lots of ups and downs. There were some big companies who confirmed that they want to take the entire round, but then turned it down the next day. So yeah. So
ODOC has been something that's 9 years in the making.
At least the investment has been 9 years in the making. ODOC would have been right now 2 years in the making.
All right. So how did the two of you come up with, or the four of you rather, come up with the idea for this? What made you think that, hey, this is a great idea, this is going to work in Sri Lanka?
Let me take that. So 3 years ago, I became a dad for the first time. Okay. And as all parents would know, young children get sick all the time. And almost every other month, you're taking them to the doctor's office. After about the millionth time this happened, and strangely enough, while I was sitting in a doctor's waiting room, I happened to read this article on telemedicine and thought that the conditions were right for the mass-scale implementation of this in Sri Lanka, given the internet penetration and internet speeds as well. So that was basically the genesis of ODOC.
What about the development of the actual software for this, for the app? What were the biggest challenges that you faced in developing this?
All right. So software generally for startups, and especially if you're a consumer grade startup, you're catering to the masses, the public, requires a lot of design and a lot of nuances built into it. And in this particular case, it's a two-way platform. We have a patient side application as well as a doctor side software, EMR and application. And it was quite challenging in terms of research and design, especially on the doctor's side, because there are a lot of specializations that they have to follow and keep track of. I think that was quite a challenging aspect of the initial development phase.
When you decide to sort of get into when you have an idea, you say, all right, I have this great idea, I'm going to make it easy for patients to consult their doctors. They're going to be able to do it face-to-face over their mobile phone. Putting that idea into implementation, can you just run us quickly through sort of the process of getting that idea into implementation?
Okay, so this is actually the advice I got from Mr. Ajit Gunawardena. I went to him one morning and told him that, hey, I have this idea, what do you think? And he was like, fantastic, go for it. And then I was like, where do I start? And he was like, Heshan, just start. So you need to start, basically.
When you say just start, okay, what's the first step?
Okay,
what's the first step that you took?
Okay, the first step I took was I completely researched the market and the idea to see if it was viable. Then I spoke to a lot of people to bounce the idea off them and to see if they think it was a good idea as well. And when I got enough of feedback, I started to get the team together, because I think that's your first step. Okay,
and when it comes to like the environment for business in Sri Lanka, it's not easy. There are just tons of red paper to wade through to figure out what it is that you need to have ready. Even the process of registering a company is not simple. How do you overcome these obstacles, and what are the challenges that you guys face?
They say all these things, that there is so much of red tape and it's not easy even to register a business. But it's not that difficult to get it done. We registered our business in a week. So I think if you have the right attitude and the mindset, the environment we face in Sri Lanka is pretty good to start a company. At least I can say this from us being in a very early stage at the moment.
What is the future for ODOC from here on? How long has the app been in operation?
So the app has only been in operation for 2 months. So we are still pre-product market fit. So within the next 5 months, we want to find our product market fit and then be a platform for health in Sri Lanka.
Healthcare is a very serious business. There are many opportunities for lawsuits, let's say. How do you propose to ensure that you maintain the sort of high standards that are expected of a healthcare service?
All right, so ODOC is basically an app that connects you with doctors for video consultation and care. And these are for conditions that do not require a physical examination. Having said that, there's a lot of research being done on telemedicine, and it's claimed that up to 70% of all regular doctor visits can be handled effectively through video. We thought this was a very high figure, but when we spoke to some of the doctors in Sri Lanka, what they said is 25% of the cases they get are for minor ailments, where you don't require a physical examination. Another 25% is for follow-up visits, may it be a lab report or just to check if the medication is working. And another 10% is mental health. So like that, they agreed as well that almost 60% of their current workload can be handled through video as well. Telemedicine is nothing new. It's been around for 40 years, and in the US and highly regulated and litigious markets such as UK as well, this is already operating. For example, in the US there is an app called Health App that has over 110,000 doctors practicing on it. And Babylon Health in the UK has more than 1 in 100 UK citizens using it. So in terms of Sri Lanka, what we have done is we comply with all the guidelines issued by the Ministry of Health for digital health. All our doctors are SLMC registered. And in the absence of a Data Protection Act in Sri Lanka, we follow HIPAA compliance, which is the stringent standard for data security, storage and transmission of personal health information.
All right, Heshan, Inshad, we'll be going in for a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about their plans for the future with two of the co-founders, rather, of ODOC. Welcome back to the program. We're in conversation with Heshan Fernando and Inshad Nizer, two of the co-founders of the latest startup, ODOC. Inshad, can you tell me what's the climate in Sri Lanka like for startups with advice, mentoring, funding, etc.? What do you make of the current climate?
All right. Yeah, so Sri Lanka is a great market for startups to maybe take a first foray in, even for Sri Lankan startups to start off with. It's a former Commonwealth country. I mean, it was a British colony. There's a lot of strong laws and systems in place. Institutions are fairly well developed. And we've got a very strong heritage of corporate culture here as well, which a lot of startups could benefit from in terms of advice to expertise, getting board directors who could contribute to management, etc. But in addition to that, it's also a fantastic market in terms of demographics, because you see this whole cross-section of different population bands who have different backgrounds and different use cases, who could also contribute a lot of data to how you optimize a product and develop it even for the region. So we see a lot of great benefits in starting in Sri Lanka. And in terms of climate for funding as well, we're seeing a lot of interest coming in from angel investors to private equity funds and so on.
Heshan mentioned that it took 9 years to sort of, that it was 9 years, the investment itself was 9 years in the making.
Sure.
Is that normal for a Sri Lankan startup?
I would say that there are better stories as well. Like, for example, we've seen Pygmy, which had a fantastic start, and I think they, of course, did it all by themselves without a long track record with any of the investors. I think if your idea is good and you've got you could exhibit traction, you could exhibit execution, even in your past ventures, I think there are investors willing to back you in Sri Lanka.
At present, how has the response been from consumers and doctors alike? Because ODOC essentially is bringing these service providers and the people in need of the service together. What has the response been like?
Fantastic. So, as with any market, I think you get different segments, and we have the early adopters on both sides, and that's what you generally would try to approach with a product like this. And once you reach a critical mass of those early adopters, and they become influencers and evangelists for your product or service, you eventually get the buy-in of the general public as well, and that's how I think we would also approach it.
So, how did you get involved in the whole the ODOC story, let's call it?
Fantastic. So Heshan and I were colleagues for the last 7 years, and you and add to that.
All right. Yes. So we were colleagues for the last 7 years, and I had left John Keel's in the June of 2016 to start working on this, and Inshad was still working at John Keel's, but had given his resignation about 3 months after that, and he wanted to move to the US to write movie scripts. So yeah, I had to take Inshad out and tell him that this was potentially a better idea than writing movie scripts for Hollywood, and we're here today.
Yeah.
So Inshad, several years later, given with how things have progressed, do you think that you might have had a better future as a screenwriter?
Let me come back to you on that.
Hindsight is 2020.
What are your plans for the future? I think obviously you have a vision for this. I mean, it's not just this right now. Where do you see this going over the next 10 years? Let's say.
Okay. Should I? I'll start. You can add. So basically, we want this to be the platform for health. Almost like iOS is the platform for an iPhone. We want this to be the platform for health. And we want to make this a global company. That's our ambition for the next 10 years.
Inshad, would you care to add to that?
Yeah, of course. So, like Heshan said, it has to be a platform for health, and it's not just the word platform. We want it to be almost like a companion device to you. So, something that could actually make a big impact in terms of your longevity and also your productivity over your lifetime.
All right, so I'll end with just a quick question to you, Inshad. So, supposing that in 10 years, ODOC achieves that you achieve this goal. I wish you all the best in achieving it. If you do, will you then do a screenplay about the ODOC story?
Of course. Definitely.
Inshad, Heshan, thank you very much for coming on the show, BizFirst Review 360. It's been a pleasure having you with us. We wish you all the best with ODOC. All right, so there you go. 10 years from now, you might expect to see a movie titled ODOC. In the meantime, you might want to go on the App Store and download the app. Could be very useful when in urgent need of medical consultation. You'll be able to get it on your phone. That's the idea that Heshan and Inshad are trying to sell to the Sri Lankan public. Will the Sri Lankan public buy it? This is BizFirst Review 360. Don't forget to look us up on Facebook. You'll find us at BizFirst Review 360. I'm Nadim Majid. Good night and good luck.